Oh, I see a couple returning. All right, so welcome. Let me just close out of this. If you are on Zoom, make sure to use the chat if you have any questions. And if you are on Facebook or YouTube, use the comment feature and it'll post as well. So, all right. So, for those of you who are new, again, welcome. Let me take you through a little bit of an overview of what this overview is. So, tonight we are looking at the reading portion. We are looking at the second out of three reading sections, and this one is about craft and structure. How tonight's webinar will work is that this is an all-in-one, so this is not a deep dive into the foundational skills of this section. This is an overview of what to expect as far as general topics, and we're going to do some practice together to work through practice type questions. So if you find that tonight you want to explore a little bit more certain topics, we have some great resources for you. And I've got all of that put here on one page for you. Now, if you are new here, at the end of the evening, what I typically do is I'll wait until the end of the night and I will save these slides for you so that you have a customized notes file of notes from tonight's session. So I do this every single time for each group, so each group of webinars gets their own customized for that night what we covered and any extra notes that we've added to it. So that way it's really kind of catered to what you and I have gone over tonight. Um, with this QR code, like I said, all of this will be given to you tonight in a PDF file. I'll have a link at the end of the evening for you, but this will be included, so don't worry that you feel like you need to quickly take a picture of this or anything. You'll get this. But I have a QR for live webinars, so if you're interested in any upcoming ones, we've already got February's posted and working on, actually, I think March is already posted as well. And then if you would like to go back and rewatch the one from tonight or any past ones, we have a QR code for that. We have a QR code for everything, actually. And then the Q bank. So the question bank, if you would like some practice on test-like questions, go check that one out. Now, the on-demand videos. This is something I like to really point out, that if while we're working on the all-in-one, you find a certain section that you're like, man, I really wish I had a little bit more explanation and look into what this topic covers and just a little bit more practice with the skills that this is covering. Well, this is where the on-demand videos are really going to help you out. So check those out. If you're interested in tutoring, QR code for that. And then we have two new options for students. We have SurePass and SurePass Pro. So this is where you can get discounted bundles. The first one is SurePass, you get the QBank and on-demand videos, and then with the Pro, you get the QBank, you get the on-demand videos, but you also get a discount on tutoring as well. So check all those out, and like I said, this will be in the handout that I give you with all of the notes for tonight. So I'll have all this compressed into one file for you. Right? So any questions before we get started? All right. Well, since we do have a lot of new faces, new names, I am Tammy Summerlin. I am an English and reading instructor. Tonight, like I said, we will look at the reading section, section 2, and I have written all of the objectives that this section covers. I'm not going to read all these to you. This is just for you when you want to go back and look over your notes, you'll remember what we covered. But essentially, what we're going to look at is the first section, we'll talk about fact and opinion. The second section, we're going to look at words and phrase meaning and how to determine those using context. The third section we're going to look at tonight is author's purpose. And then the fourth and last section will be author's point of view or perspective and using that to analyze a given text. Okay, so lots to do tonight. We have lots of learning material, and then we also have some practice questions. So I hope you guys are ready to do some practice questions. So just jumping right on in and getting into it with reading R.2 1, this is where you are learning to, and you are trying to establish the differentiation between fact versus opinions. So for this section, this is where you want to look, you want to be able to, as a test taker, be able to determine writing that is backed by evidence. You also need to be able to establish the author's viewpoint. Now, you will see that the sections we talk about tonight, a lot of them will piggyback off of each other. There will be a lot of common terminology. So that's also very helpful for students, I find. We will also take a look, and you will need to be able to recognize the author's tone and how and if it affects and projects bias into the writing. From there, you need to be able to recognize biases and then be able to determine the difference between fact and opinion. So all of these points up here will lead to this last one, being able to determine that fact versus opinion. So like I said, lots to do tonight, and we're going to jump right on in. So, as I mentioned, a lot of the terminology is common across all four sections, and I, in general, am a big believer in making sure that my students understand terminology. I oftentimes find that students they miss questions, not necessarily because they don't know the material and they can't apply the material. It's oftentimes because they just don't understand the way the question is worded. So that's what I really like to push, or why I like to push terminology. So we will have this in our notes all throughout tonight. So be prepared for that. However, again, for all my new people, just remember that you do not have to rush to write something down. I do recommend, if you are a learner who works best by taking notes, feel free to take notes through tonight, and I want you to do the practice problems with us, but I don't want anyone to feel rushed to have to write something down, okay? Because I will give us all to you. Now, with fact versus opinion, terminology that you need to make sure that you understand for questions is what objective versus subjective means. If something is objective, that means it's expressing or dealing with the facts. So facts are objective. They are dealing with facts. It is conditions that are perceived without a distortion by personal feelings, prejudices, and interpretations. So facts are objective. Just remember, facts equal objective. Now, on the flip side of that, subjective, this is when it's relating to or being an experience or knowledge that is conditioned by personal mental characteristics or states. So essentially, that means that if something is subjective, it can vary from person to person because of their personalities, because of their characteristics, because of their interpretations, because of their feelings of something. So that's where you get opinions, and opinions are subjective. So if you see in a question or in an answer something about it being objective, just know that they're referencing to facts. If it is subjective, that is opinions. Okay. So what is a fact? Like I said, facts are statements. They are information that are solid, and this is the most important thing. Are you listening? They can be checked for accuracy. It is information that can be proven through objective evidence. So again, facts, remember, when you're trying to determine if something is a fact, ask yourself, is this something I can go check? Okay. So they are objective. Now, a lot of times I have students who are anxious test takers. I don't know about any of y'all. Are you nervous test takers? Well, I say that because when I have students who are nervous test takers, they oftentimes, when it gets to the fact and opinion section, they will get very anxious because they're like, oh man, I don't know if this is correct or not. Well, when you are trying to determine if something is a fact, do not sit there and stress yourself out, because remember, unfortunately, I know it makes it worse, but the clock is ticking and time is running out. You need to be able to look at something, process it, answer, and move on. Okay. So a lot of times that will stress students out because they sit there and think, oh, well, I don't know if this is correct or not. That's not what they're looking for. What you need to do to be able to determine if something is a fact is simply ask yourself this: can I go look this up? Okay. I always, like, I don't know about y'all, but I do love some Google. Sometimes it doesn't love me and it may cause my anxiety to be elevated. But when I'm trying to determine if something is a fact, I would ask myself, okay, can I go Google this and find if it's correct or not? Okay. Don't worry about if it's correct. Ask yourself, can you go look this up? Okay. Take some of that pressure off yourself. Test taking is stressful in general. Let's not add to it. So, for example, these are all, these would all be considered facts. Look at how they're worded, okay? On September 22nd, 1862, President Abraham Lincoln issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. This has a date, and it's talking about an event, and we can go look it up. Now, it might have been on September 23rd when it was actually issued. However, the way it's worded as if it were a fact. We're not worrying about if it's correct. We're worrying about, or we're trying to determine, is it a fact based off that wording? Okay. So his cow has two heads. Well, we may think, well, that just doesn't sound right. Okay. But can you go look outside in the field and see if that cow has two heads? Why, yes, you can. You might not think it's true, but you could go verify if it's true or not. Maybe they live next to where an asteroid hit down or something, or a power plant. Well, we can go look outside and see if that cow has two heads. Or we can take someone's factual testimony. Some snakes can retract their fangs. Well, I do not recommend going out and picking up a snake to see if this is true, but somewhere with the appropriate, protection, someone can go verify this, right? Again, do not try this at home, children. But someone can go verify that. Or if you're me, I'm going to go to Google and I'm going to type in, can snakes retract their fangs? And I'm going to see what it says. I'm going to look at my encyclopedia, my Wiki. Well, I don't trust Wikipedia because anybody can adjust Wikipedia. But you know what I mean. We can go look it up. Okay. But all of these things are things that we can go verify. We're not stressing about, is it true? We're asking ourselves, is this something that can be verified? All right. Now I've babbled on for a little bit. Does anybody have any questions? Everybody good? All right. So now we've talked about facts. Let's look at opinions. Well, opinions, they can be open to question. They are fluid. They are ever changing. That's what we mean when we say fluid. They're ever changing. These are beliefs. They are judgments. They are conclusions, but they are not reached through objectivity. You do not reach these by fact. Okay, they might be inspired by fact, but they're not based on fact. These are open, like I said, open to question, and they are subjective. They can vary from person to person. That's a helpful tip. Think of it as, could this change from person to person? Whereas with a fact, we're just going to go look it up. Now, examples of opinions. Taking the same concepts from what we just talked about a little while ago with those examples on facts, but let's look at these. President Abraham Lincoln was the best president the United States has ever had. Well, this would be an opinion because someone else might believe that a different president is the best president we've ever had. While, Susie thinks Abraham Lincoln's the best president, Bobby might think that Hoover was the best president or Teddy Roosevelt was the best president. So that can vary from person to person. Now, if we say his cow's appearance is repulsive, talking about that little two-headed cow now. So this might be how someone feels about that little two-headed cow. They might look at it and say, ooh, that's just disgusting. Well, but you know what? I bet there is someone out there that thinks that that little two-headed cow is just the most adorable little thing you've ever seen. I mean, so that can change from person to person. Snakes are the scariest reptiles. Well, now, while I might feel that this is fact because I believe it with my whole heart, other people, I have a friend who absolutely loves snakes and has 3 of them in tanks in her house. Will I ever set foot in her house? No, I will not. But she does not think that snakes are the scariest reptiles. She sits there and she pets them things and she lets them crawl all over her. And ooh, I'm getting heebie jeebies just thinking about it. But again, that can vary from person to person. Now we can go look it up and see if the snake's fangs retract. But the fact about if they're the scariest reptiles or not, that would vary from person to person. You kind of get the gist of it? Everybody doing good? Y'all are a quiet bunch tonight. Come on now. I'm gonna get y'all talking. All right, so, oh, there we go. All right, so now in the chat box, in the comment section, how would you, just one word, we don't have to do complete sentences or anything, but how would you describe a sunset? What's one word? And there's no right or wrong answer here. Amazing. Anybody else? Lovely. Nice. Dreamy. Yeah. So those are all different opinions. Peaceful. When I think of a sunset, I think radiating. Like, just that radiating glow. Okay. Now, let me ask you this. You heard how I feel about it, snakes. But how would you describe a snake? Dangerous. Oh, reptile, dangerous, scary, scary. Oh, looks like we are all the same type of people. Slimy. Mm-hmm. So, again, those are all different descriptions that come to mind when we think of snakes. So, those vary from person to person, much like opinions do. Now, you all tell me, not that I'm going to go anywhere, but where would you say the best place to visit on vacation is? If you had to name one place to go, where's the best place to go on vacation? Lake Tahoe, Aruba, the Bahamas. Anybody else? Hawaii, Puerto Vallarta, West Palm Beach. Oh, we got some warm people. Like, y'all like to vacation where it's warm. Y'all my kind of people. Last time I asked this question, my class gave me, they were talking about, like the frozen Arctic or something. But yes, all of those are different. Your your idea of the best place to go. But see how those all differ from person to person, and that's the concept of opinions. Now, couple thoughts to keep in mind as you're testing. These are some tips and tricks. So, now just remember, we've talked about how we're not going to stress if it's true or not. Okay? We are only trying to determine if we can go look it up. So, remember, fact statements could be found to be untrue. Well, what does that mean? That's just, sounds kind of contradictory. Well, now just remember, for example, if you have a new type of snake that's discovered to be the new, like, to be the deadliest or have the deadliest bite, the previous statement about whatever other snake it was, that would now be considered untrue. So if I said, I'm going to just make this up because I can't remember different types of snakes to save my life. But if the Texas rattlesnake was or is the most dangerous, but then, they are out in the Australian outback and they discover this new Australian rattlesnake and they say, oh, this is the most poison or most dangerous snake or most poisonous. Let's use that wording. The most poisonous snake. Well, at one point in time, the Texas rattlesnake was the most poisonous. It was true at that time. It's now just been proven to be untrue. It doesn't mean that it's no longer considered a fact. It was, when it was true, it was a fact. It's just like at one point, now we're not going to get into politics of this, okay, people? But at one point, people believed that the world was flat. However, then there were new discoveries made that it's round. So that became called what we now call a fact error. It's just like if you say they said that the Empire State Building is the tallest building in North America. Well, then they go and build a bigger building. Now it's no longer the tallest one, but at one point in time it was. So that's what we call a fact error. It just means that it's no longer true. Just remember, can I go look this up? Can I go verify it? Opinions will vary from person to person. Facts we can go look up. Now, speaking of opinions, remember to consider value words. And this is what we were doing with those practices where I asked you about sunsets and snakes and vacations. Value words are the words that are used to express those judgments, those beliefs. They are typically going to be those subjective, opinionated words. So, objective statements, those are facts. They report reality. What you see is what you get. Whereas subjective, those opinions, they are an interpretation of reality. So, for example, if I say it is sunny today, well, that's a fact. I can go look outside and I can see if it's sunny. However, if I say it is beautiful today and the sun is shining and the sun's shining, the birds are chirping, and I say, "Oh, it is so beautiful today." Well, that's my opinion of it or your opinion of it. However, there are some people, and I do actually believe I fall into this category, but there are some people that, you know, they find themselves more at peace and they find a rainy day to be more beautiful. Did you know that? Did you know that there was a research study done recently that some people are actually more productive when it's raining than when it's sunny? So, anyways, just to share that. But that can vary. Some people like it when it's sunny. Some people, they get migraines when it's super sunny, and they like a rainy day better. It's just peaceful, mellow, relaxing. So that's something that can vary from person to person. A couple, not all by any means, but some value words are best, worst, better, worse, great, terrible, lovely. See, we talked about some of those. Some of y'all have used these words. Disgusting, beautiful, good, and wonderful. So those are examples of value words. Again, each person's definition of value words is going to change. So the definition of best might be different from another person's interpretation of best. Make sure that you are on the lookout and recognize signal options. Well, what are signal options? Those are words like should and ought. They are going to introduce what people think should or ought to be done. That's where they come from. So they are suggesting what people think. However, another person might disagree with that. So, for example, if I present it as a fact, it would be worded like smoking is banned in that restaurant. Well, somewhere they've got a sign posted, or there's some kind of, rule that's been declared for that restaurant that smoking is banned. We can go look it up. We can go check with the manager, whatever. But if you reword it using signal options, that would be smoking should be banned in public. Well, that's what that author's belief is. However, if you got somebody that smokes cigarettes, then I'm pretty sure that they don't think smoking should be banned in public, right? So that's where signal words are helpful. And if you can recognize those, you can recognize opinions faster or easier. Now, be careful that you do not mistake a widely held opinion for a fact. Okay, this is one that will trip people up on, especially on test questions. So, for example, if you have a real estate agent who's, showing you a house and they say, oh, this is the best school district in the county. Well, I don't know about you, but my definition of the best school district might differ from my friend's definition of the best school district, you know? So one buyer might wonder, what's their interpretation of what makes it the best. Okay. So for example, if you were to try to change this, that's an opinion. This is the best school district in the county. The reason being is that what makes it the best? Okay. If it were to be presented as a fact, it might be that this is the highest academic ranked school in the county. Well, you can go look at the records and compare all of the schools in the county to see who has the highest academic ranking. Now, when you just say the best school district, that's where you open it up to that interpretation. Now, you might have one family who, really recognizes academics above all else. But then you might have other families who really want to have a school that has a very solid athletic department because they need their child to get a scholarship to go on to college. That would make it the best school for them, right? Everybody's needs are different, so their interpretation of what makes it the best would be different. Therefore, it makes the best school district phrasing an opinion instead of a fact. Okay, but a lot of times students will see this is the best school district and they think, oh, well, I can go look that up. But how? What are we evaluating best on? Does that make sense? Okay. Now remember, another thing is that, and especially with trick questions, remember that there can be a mixture of fact and opinion. Sometimes you will have a statement that is a little bit fact and a little bit opinion. That's where you have to take all these tips and tricks that I've shared with you. Can I go verify it? Does this change from person to person? Do I see signal words? Do I see value words? You're analyzing all of these components within a sentence. But don't be afraid that you have to say, oh, well, it's just a fact, or oh, it's just an opinion. They might have merged some of them together. Oh, that's very small. I don't know why my font went so little. Let's see. Mm-mm. Well, if I do this, can y'all see that okay? Yes, okay. All right, so I've got 4 questions here. I'm gonna put my timer, so just that way you get used to working with the timer. I'm gonna put my timer for let's say 2.5 minutes, and we'll see how we do. If we find we need a little bit more time, that's okay. But I'm gonna put 2.5 minutes on my timer, and you guys come up and tell me um what your answers are. A, B, C, D. Feel free to type those in the chat or the comment section. I like to see how you're doing. And at the end of the time, we'll come back and check. Okay? All right, ready, set, and go. All right, let's go through and check them. So for number 1, A, number 2, B, 3 is A, and 4 is B. All right, any questions on those? Number 1. All right, so which statement is a fact? So for number 1, A, many people consider William Shakespeare the greatest playwright of all time. B, sorry, I lost my voice there for a second. Shakespeare's plays are more entertaining than modern plays. C, the best play written by Shakespeare is Hamlet. D, Shakespeare's writing is more poetic than other playwrights. Okay, now with number 1, this is a very tricky one. Okay, so if you got this wrong, please do not sit there and beat yourself up. Okay, 1, we just reviewed all this. You're just learning this, so don't beat yourself up. 2, this is one of the ones I would consider the more elevated, because if you look at these, this is where you kind of have to do a little bit of process elimination to work backwards, because this one does not have a glaringly obvious one. So with B, Shakespeare's plays are more entertaining than modern plays. Says who? Somebody might really enjoy modern plays way more than Shakespeare. So more entertaining, that's one of those, more is that value word. So that can vary from person to person. With C, the value word best. The best play written by Shakespeare is Hamlet. Well, I'm so sorry, but Hamlet's not the best one for me. You know, it's very dark, it's very scary. I actually like King Lear the best. You know, it's not Romeo and Juliet. I know that's very shocking to people, but Romeo and Juliet's not my favorite either. It's actually a little like weird. But King Lear is my favorite. So that would not be the best written one. Hamlet would not be the best written one for me. So that can vary from person to person. Shakespeare's writing style is more poetic than other playwrights. Again, the value word more opens it up to interpretation. Whereas with A, many people, now look at the wording here. This is where it gets very tricky. Many people consider William Shakespeare the greatest playwright of all time. Well, it looks like it's an opinion because it says the greatest playwright of all time, right? Okay. But notice how at the beginning of the sentence I worded it, many people consider William Shakespeare. Could I go around and take a poll and see if they consider him the greatest? Could I go around and ask you and say, do you consider William Shakespeare the greatest playwright of all time? And then I go around and ask the next person and the next person. And then 10 out of 18 say that he's the greatest. Well, then that would be many people, right? This is where I can go collect that data. So I can go look that up to see if that's a common, widely recognized viewpoint. So while part of it looks like an opinion, that beginning phrasing is what shifts it and makes it then a fact. Now, somebody asked about number 3. Which of these statements is based on fact? Oh, okay. Okay, you don't need me to do that one again. All right. Any other questions? Like I said, number 1 is actually a very tricky trick question. Tricky trick. All right, so everybody's good? All right. Number 3 said, which of these statements is not a fact? Oh, okay, instead of based on a fact. Yep. Yeah, that can get you. Now, we've talked about facts, we've talked about opinions. This section also it also brings in factual writing. So you need to make sure that you understand the difference and can recognize what factual writing is. So there's a couple different types of sources. So those could be print or electronic. So that would be direct quotes, paraphrasing, summaries. Interviews are factual writing. Again, that pulls in direct quotes, paraphrasing, summaries. That's what makes it factual because it's based off quotes, paraphrasing, or summaries. Surveys, you can go around and collect that data, statistics. Experiments, you can track your experiments with charts and graphs. And then a lot of times students will forget or they don't realize that personal experiences are are actually recognized as factual writing. Well, but that seems a little weird, right? Because with factual writing versus opinions or facts versus opinions, opinions are based off people's personal thoughts. Well, but factual writing can be personal experiences because a person can give a description. They can take photos and provide photos and drawings. They can be while you can have opinions, you can have factual writing that are personal experiences because you're documenting what is happening. And I always try to keep that in mind. Like, I mean, I know not very many people probably read this anymore, but have you ever read Anne Frank's diary? That's actually considered factual writing because that's a firsthand account of what she witnessed and what she experienced. Yeah. So now, if it's a biography, excuse me, if it's an autobiography, that would be considered factual writing. So from there, we look at author's point of view. First person. This is where the narrator is in the writing. This is where you see, wait, hold on. Therefore, would that be a primary source? Yes. Yes. If it's a first-hand, um, or if it's the actual account of something, that would be a primary source. Yes, that's correct. So if it's for when you're trying to look at point of view, there's four different ones we're going to talk about tonight and ones to keep in mind when test taking. First person, that's where your narrator is in the story. You get the first person pronouns. I, me, my. The narrator is one of the characters within the story, the primary character at that. Second person point of view is when it speaks directly to the reader. So that author is speaking directly to you, the reader. This is where you're going to use second person pronouns. You do this, or you may not see the direct second person pronouns. You might have what we call implied second person, the implied you. But this is where you're giving commands. You're speaking directly to the reader. This is going to be seen in more of procedural writing when you're telling someone to do something, put the cake in the oven. Sorry, my mind just like went blank on trying to give instructions to somebody. But when you're telling someone to do something, and that's where you get that implied second person. So it's still speaking directly to the reader, but you're not actually using the pronouns. Put the cake in the oven. Instead of saying you put the cake in the oven, I just say put the cake in the oven. So that's where the implied second person comes into play. Now, with third person, this is where the narrator is going to be outside of that story completely. They are not involved in the story, they are not a character within the story. The author is not connected at all to the events or the information that's being provided. So, this is where you have those third person pronouns. So, Bobby was feeling lonely today. He decided to go for a walk. So, third person removed. The characters are just doing their thing. Now, once you can recognize point of view, then you start to look at author's purpose. So this is where, with tying it into fact versus opinion, this is where the amount of fact and opinions that's in a text can sometime depend on what the author's purpose is. So author's purpose is why the author wrote this piece. Okay? Why did the author write this? Well, depending on why the author wrote it, that might dictate how much fact or how much opinion that author chooses or needs to put within the writing. So, for example, if you have a newspaper or a textbook, a scientific report, the purpose of these are all written to inform the reader. Okay. What do you need if you want to inform accurately? You need facts. You need it to be based on to be factual as much as possible. if you have editorials in the newspaper, okay? So not just like when I say newspapers, I mean like the news stories. They're talking about um oh, I don't even know. What are they talking about in the newspaper? New policies that are going into place. But but on the other side, you have editorials. Well, editorials, political speeches, advertisements, those are all meant to persuade the reader in some way or another. So if you're trying to persuade somebody, you're going to present more opinions. They're going to be more opinionated. They're not typically going to be based on facts. Now, another part of this section is being able to understand bias and being able to recognize the subtle shift in wording and how that can present bias. So, for example, I have these three statements right here. Raquel spends only 10% of her income on groceries. Raquel is thrifty. Raquel is cheap. Now, look at it. I'm talking about pretty much her spending, right? But based on the wording, it presents the information in a different way. The first statement, this one is presented in a factual way. This is not going to show bias at all. Factual writing typically will not show, well, it actually doesn't show bias because it's stating the facts. But if I say 10% of her income, well, I can go look at what her total income is and I can calculate to see, does she actually spend 10% of her income on groceries? We can go look that up. There's no bias there. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But if I say Raquel is thrifty, think about the connotation that's attached to that word thrifty. What kind of vibe do you get off of that word? Well, if I say it's thrifty, that's actually showing bias, but it's doing it in a positive light because it's almost like I'm saying, "Oh, well, she's thrifty. That means she's doing it well." But if I take it and I just change that one word and I say Raquel is cheap, well, that has a negative connotation attached to it. It's usually undesirable. It's like, gives that ick. So that's showing a negative bias. But both ways, thrifty and cheap, I'm both talking about her spending habits, right? But because of my word choice, that affects if it's a positive bias versus if it's a negative bias. Okay. But that's the importance of being able to recognize that subtle shift in word choices. So, bias, it can be, now a lot of people think too that bias means that I'm showing, that I'm not showing favoritism towards it. I'm actually anti whatever. I have to remind students that you can actually show bias in favor of something. This is going to probably stir up some heated comments, but think about with the Chiefs right now. Is there any bias from those referees? I'm not going to say anymore. I'll just let you think on that one. Okay. I don't know how y'all feel about this Super Bowl now, but that can be biased. So we are going to practice. I have given you a passage right here. Now, this is not multiple choice. This is not, you're not going to see something like this on the test, but this is just to build up your practice skills, okay? So just hang in there. There's a method to the madness. So I want you to go through this paragraph right here, okay? And I want you to see if you can find as many as you can words that illustrate value words. So this is going back to what we talked about earlier when we were talking about just fact versus opinions, but that's important to be able to identify because that's going to help you illustrate and determine if there is any bias, and if there is, what kind of bias is there. So I'm going to put a minute and a half on the timer, and you see how many value words you can find during that time, okay? And you can type them out in the chat if you want to. All right, ready? Set, and go. All right, let's see what you found. Ooh. So, suckers, unwisely, wasting, flamboyant, regrettable, wiser, sheep's wool, taken advantage of. These are all biased words. So, based off this, we can see that the writer is not objective about grocery shoppers. Okay? But good. All right, let's try this one. I'm going to put a minute. I'm going to do a minute and a half because that seemed to be good for everybody. All right, go through this one and see if you can find those. Okay? Ready, set, go. All right, let's take a. Oh, we're still typing. All right, let's take a look. Unabridged. Wealth. Thriving. Priceless. Treasure. Should. There's one of those signal words we talked about. Responsible. Gem. Encroach. So these all illustrate the author's bias. This one's showing in favor of Yellowstone National Park and showing bias against those developers who might harm it. Okay. So that's the first section. Now, don't worry. We are towards the end of the night. We're going to do kind of like a cumulative review with test-like questions. So there's some more practice coming, but we're going to go ahead and take a shift into section 2. Okay. So now this section is looking at how to determine word and phrase meaning based off context, pretty much context clues that you're given within a reading or a passage. So we're going to look at how to use those clues to figure out what a word means, and then ooh, my stutter, hello, how certain words can affect the overall meaning or feeling of a text, and then understand the exact meaning and the implied meanings. That's a big one. The implied meanings of words based off of context clues. So now, again, we're going to talk about some terminology. What are context clues? Well, a context clue or context clues are words or phrases, okay, not just one or the other, but words or phrases that surround an unfamiliar word, and you're going to use those context clues because they provide hints or they give you information about what that word means. Why are these important? Well, thank you for asking. So context clues, they obviously will help expand your vocabulary. They help you comprehend the reading material better. They help you become a good reader overall. But let's get real, people. It's really because it's going to help you answer these questions, right? And this is not just even for the questions that focus on, well, what does this word mean? This is when you're looking at other questions as well. Maybe you don't know what something means, okay? But you're reading through a paragraph and you're like, what's that word? Well, guess what? We don't have time when we're being timed to sit there and wonder and think about, what could this word possibly mean? We got to keep rolling with the punches. Like, we got to go, we got to go, we got to go. So we use context clues to help us understand, break it down, digest it, and process it. And we do that within a couple quick seconds. Okay. So that's also why, just if we're being completely honest. So strategies to help you to use context clues. Make sure, I know we are tempted to skim, but I'm never going to tell you that. Okay. I'm going to be real with you. You really should read the entire text. Okay. Read whatever that whole sentence is, read whatever that whole passage is, because that is going to help you have a better understanding of the context. If you skip sentences, if you skip paragraphs, you might miss the clues that are being provided. Okay. When you are looking for context clues, consider the tone and the mood of what you're reading. What's the overall feeling? What's the attitude that that passage is giving off? Okay. So that can also help give you hints about what a word's meaning is. Now, there are a couple different types of context clues, and I am going to go through these with you because I do think that being able to use these can really make a difference in being able to fully get your bang for your buck out of those context clues. So, examples, synonyms, antonyms, and then there are context clues that we call the general sense. So, starting off with everybody's favorite, this is really everybody's favorite as far as my students are concerned, but example context clues. Well, this is where you have real examples of what a word means in that sentence or in that paragraph. So they help the reader understand what a word means because they're giving the reader an example of what that word means. So, for example, if I were to give you the sentence, the explorer's bravery knew no limits. He fearlessly faced dangerous environments, explored uncharted lands, and even faced treacherous storms. Well, the word that I want you to assess is bravery. Okay. But in that, well, multi sentences right there, in those sentences, the examples of facing that dangerous environment, exploring those uncharted lands, and facing treacherous storms, those are all examples of what bravery is. So, from those examples, we come to understand that bravery means that we're showing courage and fearlessness in these challenging situations. So, by having those examples, it gives us an idea, a visualization, if you will, of what that word means. Now, synonym context clues, not synonym context clues, those are where you have a word or words, could be multiple, that have a similar meaning to an unfamiliar word. Okay. So, for example, if I say the author's eloquent writing captivated the audience with its articulate and expressive language. Well, the word I want you to assess is eloquent. Well, what does eloquent mean? Well, another word for that would be either articulate or expressive. These are synonyms for the word eloquent. So remember, synonyms are words that mean the same. But flip that upside down. Antonym context clues. Well, an antonym is a word that means the opposite. This is where they give you a word with or words within that sentence that mean the opposite of the word that you're trying to assess or the word you're trying to determine the meaning of. So, for example, if I were to say, The storm brought about chaos, but the following day was marked by calmness. The word I want you to assess is chaos. Well, what word in that sentence means the opposite of chaos? It tells you the storm brought about the chaos. The next day brought about what? It brought calmness. So that's the antonym of chaos. So we know that the opposite of chaos is calmness. So then if you want to try to determine a definition for chaos itself, you just say, well, okay then. Well, if calmness is the opposite of chaos, what's another word for the opposite of calmness? And this is when you're doing those A, B, C, D multiple choice. That's where you're asking yourself, which one of these A, B, C, D would be the opposite of calmness? Well, if you see disorder up there, that's going to be your answer. See how that works? It's kind of like a big full circle. You got to go a little bit more with those antonym ones. Everybody with me so far? If I lost anybody? All right. Now, with general sense of the sentence, this is where you really just kind of have to take it all in and you have to analyze what the entire sentence is saying. Kind of like you're trying to see the big picture of it. You don't have to submit your email. I'll actually I'm going to compress this into one folder and I'm going to give this to you in a link in the chat section in just a little bit. Oh, good. All right, so with general sense, again, we're really looking at the big picture of what's going on in the sentence. So this is where you might have to ask yourself, okay, well, what's going on? So if I have, in the sentence, in the forest, the foliage was dense, making it difficult for sunlight to penetrate the canopy. Well, if they ask you, what does foliage mean? Well, you've kind of got to look and see what's going on in that sentence. The foliage was dense, making it difficult for sunlight to penetrate through the canopy. Well, if it's making it difficult to penetrate through the canopy, I like to, personally, this is just what works for me as a test taker. I kind of like to do process of elimination. That's how I was raised I was that generation of students that came up, being taught how to take a test. And that's what they taught us. Use process of elimination. So I'm going to ask myself, all right, well, do small insects being dense make it difficult for sunlight to come through the top of the trees? No, that doesn't make sense at all. And if so, that's scary. But no, it doesn't make sense. Does thick vegetation or leaves, do thick leaves make it being dense? If they're thick leaves, they're dense. Does that make it difficult for light to come through the top of the trees with the canopy? Yeah. But let's just keep on checking just for the sake of it. Does the muddy ground below you have anything to do with the light being able to come in up above you? No, not based off this sentence. Do animal tracks have anything to do with the light being able to come through the top? No. So B was the best answer. It is the correct answer. The thick vegetation or leaves. So sometimes you have to do process of elimination. And you know what? I've seen where students will beat themselves up because they think that they're not supposed to for some reason. You know what? Here's a little secret. It's okay. It'll be fine. And you know what? If you're like me, I'm a terrible test taker. I know you probably never thought you would hear your instructor say that or an instructor say that. I have test anxiety. And just being all honest, that's why I do TEAS prep, because I've had to sit through the TEAS before. I did take the TEAS. In a different life, I was going to be a physical therapist. But this is why I have these tips and tricks, because that's what works for me as a test taker. Everybody's different. So really think about what works for you. And that's why I've shown you these different types of context clues. Okay? Not everybody's the same. Not everybody approaches things the same. Now, when you are trying to determine definitions or word meanings, think about word choice. Okay? So, word choice, it can influence pretty heavily what a sentence means, what a word means. So it can affect the clarity, you know. Descriptive words, they're going to give out a lot more meaning and convey a lot more than just general blah words. Tone, they can affect word choice, different emotions, attitudes. They can shape what the central message of a passage is. Persuasiveness, so strategic wording, when you have those signal words, when you have those value words, that can influence other people's opinions and actions. Okay? So, a couple things that you want to think about when you're reading and you're trying to determine what a word or a phrase means. Think about who's the intended audience of this passage. Okay? That's where you have to consider the knowledge, background, different preferences of whomever that audience would be. Think about context. So adapt your word choice to fit specific context. Think about whether it's formal, informal, academic, professional. And then ask yourself, what is the purpose of this writing? Why is this piece being written? Okay. So is it informing? Is it persuading, entertaining, expressing emotions? Now, a couple strategies for effective word choice, because this goes into a little bit more of a different type of question. So when you're trying to establish if something's giving the most clear meaning of something, so we're not trying to determine the definition of a specific word in a sentence. We're trying to establish is what is being said the most clear, coherent way to say it. Okay. So think about, is the author using vivid and descriptive language? That's so very important in being able to provide a reader with details that they need. If they're too generic, okay, you're not going to have that clear, vivid mental image. If it is using correct, effective word choice, it will avoid ambiguity. What's ambiguity? Those are those vague words that can be misinterpreted or misunderstood. It can vary from person to person. I mentioned earlier when we were talking about Raquel, when we were talking about thrifty versus the word using cheap, consider connotations and denotations. So be mindful of emotional associations or connotations or denotations that are attached to the words. And you want to make sure that the answer option you're picking, if they're asking you for word choice or the best word choice, make sure that it's giving off a clear, well intended meaning. Now, with word choice, you do need to, like I said, think about tone and voice. So you want to ensure there's a consistent tone. You do not want to have a wish-washy writer. The writer should not come across as sarcastic and then depressed. Okay? We don't want to have a major shift in the tone and the voice. Now, when you're trying to determine if something is worded the best it can, make sure that you break down those complex concepts into more simpler, more accessible language. Okay. Just because something looks really flowery with the wording does not mean that that's the best way it can be said. Sometimes, short, sweet, and simple to the point is the best way to say it. Now, in section 2, you will also see questions about figurative language. So this is where you need to, again, make sure you know that terminology. So if you are talking about figurative language, you've got literal meaning versus figurative meaning. If something is a literal meaning, that means that the words that they're using are what they mean. So what you see is what you get. But if it's a figurative meaning, the words are going to say one thing, but they really mean another. Okay? So, for example, if I say the sky is blue, guess what? That sky is blue. If I say the dog barks loudly, well, that dog barks pretty loudly. But if I were to switch and I were to use figurative language and I say, oh, you're a peach. Well, I don't mean that I just went and plucked you off a peach tree, did I? And you got a fuzzy outside and a stone in the middle. No, I'm not saying you physically are a peach. I'm comparing you to a peach. What do we typically associate with peaches? What do you guys typically associate with peaches? They're what? They're sweet. That's right. So if I say you're a peach, I'm really saying, oh, you're sweet. So that's a figurative meaning. If you say she reminded me 100 times, well, Sally probably, let's be real, Sally probably did not sit there and actually say 100 times reminding you of something. Okay? I know that the stereotypical thing is that husbands feel that way about their wives, but most likely that wife did not sit there and say it 100 times. No, it probably just felt like it. So that's an over exaggeration, but that's still figurative meaning. We're not going to sit there and count, and if we did sit there and count, it probably was not actually 100 times. It's probably like 52. And it was probably about the trash. No, I'm just kidding. Am I though? Now, when talking about figurative language, there are a couple different types that you're going to see come up more often than others. And those are simile. And this is when you have a comparison. You're comparing two things that are typically not alike. And you're going to use the words like or as within that comparison or when making that comparison. So, for example, if I say the board twisted like a string, I'm talking about a hard piece of wood, a board, and a flimsy little string. Well, those two things are not the same, right? But I'm saying that the board twisted like that string. I'm comparing the board to a string. Now, if it's a metaphor, this is also a comparison. These are the two that students get mixed up, simile versus metaphor. Well, a metaphor is going to also compare two unlike things. This time, they're just not going to do it with the words like or as present within the statement. So, his heart is made of stone. Well, if I go pull out the x-ray machine, I'm probably not going to see a stone where his heart should be, right? Not typically. He wouldn't be walking around. But I'm comparing his heart to that of a stone. I just didn't use the comparison words like or as. Okay. Personification. Now, this is when you're giving human traits to objects. Could be animals, or it could be, just stagnant concrete objects, or to ideas. That's the one that students will forget about too, that you're giving it to ideas. So if you say the moonlight danced across the water, well, moonlight does not have 2 feet out there to be boogieing and woogieing, do they? Or does it? No, but I'm giving it that human characteristic of being able to dance. Now, this will trick students up sometimes because they'll think of things like it has to be a human characteristic. Okay? But think of it as more open to where it's just how do I word this? So if I'm talking about, like um what's a good one? Like Langston Hughes, he has a poem and in it he compares dreams to different things. Well, dreams are ideas and they're being given different personality traits, or they're being given personality traits that or characteristics that are not typical of an abstract concept of a dream. That is also to consider personification. Now, hyperboles, this is an exaggeration or a strong feeling. This is that comment that I said. She reminded him 100 times. It's an exaggeration. She probably didn't actually say it 100 times on the dot. Your house is 1,000,000 miles away. It's probably not actually 1,000,000 miles away. If we calculated it up, it's probably more like 732. Okay. But it's an exaggeration of how you feel about that. And then last but not least, this is my favorite one, alliteration. So this is where there's that repetition of the initial consonant sounds. What are consonants? Thank you for asking. That's anything that's not a vowel. So A, E, I, O, U, those are vowels. Every other letter of the alphabet, B, C, D, those are consonants. So an example of that many of you probably have heard is Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. It's that constant repeat of the P. Sally sells seashells by the seashore. Again, that repetition of that consonant, the S. And alliteration can be very subtle, so sometimes it's not going to be right in your face like Peter Piper here. So be careful of that. All right, so we've got to practice right here. I'm going to put 2.5 minutes on my timer, just in case anybody needs to grab some water or something too. And then we're going to come back and check. Okay? Ready, and set, and go. All right, just a couple more seconds. All right, let's take a look at this practice. So for number 1, C, personification. The wind whispered through the trees, so people whisper. The wind doesn't have lips to whisper, so that would be personification. 2, A, is a simile. As fast as. There's that as being used to make a comparison. Number 3, that one is B, a metaphor. We're comparing the classroom to a zoo. We're just not using like or as, so it's a metaphor instead of a simile. And then number 4, that one is C. It's a hyperbole. A million things to do. Well, if you sat down and did your to-do list, it's probably not actually a million things. It just feels like it. All right, so that one's C. Any questions on That one. Everybody doing okay? The answer, yes. So number 1, C. 2, A. 3 is B. And 4 is C. And let me know if you have any questions. I did jump to the next page too soon. Oh, somebody asked me, what is onomatopoeia? Onomatopoeia. Ooh. So that is where you have a word that when you, how do I best, what's the best way to describe it? So an onomatopoeia is when you have a word that's, when you say it, it sounds like what it is. Does that make sense? So like if you say like sizzle, well, y'all don't make fun of me, okay? This is a judgment-free zone, right? All right, so if you say sizzle, the word sizzle, well, sizzle, when something is sizzling, what does it do? It sizzles. It makes that noise. It's kind of like a cuckoo clock. Well, what is a cuckoo? What does it do? It goes cuckoo, right? So that's what that is. Um, B for number 2. Oh, okay. And see, and that's what gets people sometimes. They get similes and metaphors mixed up. But simile is going to have that comparison, but using the words like or as, whereas a metaphor, it makes that comparison, but it doesn't use it. All right. Good questions. Any other questions? Let me make sure I didn't miss any. Now, as somebody said, they need to practice more on those. Definitely check out the Q Bank because I know that I wrote a ton of those. So if you need to practice, definitely check out the Q Bank because I got you covered. I wrote a ton of those questions. Yep. It'd be onomatopoeia would be like ouch, bam, pow, bang, boo. Well, no, boo, that wouldn't work. No, that's not right. But bang, if something makes a bang, that's what it does. It sounds bang. Yep. QBank. So if you go to our website, well, actually, I've got a QR code that I'll give you with these notes, and you can just scan it. It'll say like visit our QBank, and there's a QR code that you can scan with your phone, and it'll take you right to the website link. Versus me trying to give you a website to remember. Oh, you're welcome. Oh, you're welcome too. All right, so again, we're going to come back to this and we're going to do a little bit more practice, but we're just practicing a little bit as we go, and then we'll test it all out once we put it all together. Now, with section 3, this is where you're analyzing a text based off of or trying to determine the author's purpose. So, a couple of different things are going to be accomplished in this section. This is where you've got to determine evidence that supports the author's purpose. That's a big one. Being able to determine and find out what the author's purpose is. And then I told you this was going to come back, but being able to find fact versus opinion or facts and opinions. And then you do need to be able to examine tone, because you remember that saying, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Well, that can really affect a lot of different aspects of analyzing a text. And then being able to make inferences about what the author's intended purpose is. So why is the author writing this? And again, you're like, well, we've talked a little bit about this. I told you, I forewarned you people, it's going to be a recycling of that terminology. Now, we mentioned it, we talked very briefly on it, but let's circle back to the different types of purpose. So there's a couple different types of purpose that you need, that you have, I'm sorry. You have to inform. This is when you're going to see a lot of facts, a lot of text features, This is not going to have material that shows or gives opinions or shows any bias. So when you're reading through your passage, you're looking and you're saying, oh, there's a lot of facts in here. Well, then it's probably meant to inform you. But if you have a lot of arguing in favor of one side over another, now they might use facts to back up what they're saying, but they're also going to mix in their opinions of it. They might have what we call a call to action, like this needs to be done to save our planet Earth. They're going to use that emotional and sometimes logical, sometimes ethical language to persuade you into their side of the argument. Okay, so if you're persuading, you're trying to bring someone over to your side and, get them to believe what you believe. Now, to entertain. This one is way more complex than what people give it credit for. This can include fiction, so made up stories, anecdotes if you don't know, because that's not a dumb question. If you are sitting there wondering, like, what's an anecdote? Well, thank you for not asking. Well, I mean, no, that's not what I meant, but you know what I mean. So anecdotes, that's just stories. When you see the word anecdotes, that just means telling a story. It's just a fancy way. Fancy way. But if it uses action, drama, human, a lot of times students will get tripped up. They think that if something is written to entertain, it needs to bring a chuckle out of you. It's supposed to be funny because people think entertaining is like, ha ha ha. Well, but is it? You know, think about it. When you go to the movies, do you always go see a comedy? Do you really? No. We're going to also go see, like, some of us like to go see those rom-coms. I mean, it's got a little bit of humor in it, but it's also got a romance. We like for our heart to go pitter-patter. Now, if you sit down, now this is probably going to date me, but if you were to sit down and you ever watched a Nicholas Sparks movie or read a Nicholas Sparks book? Anybody? Come on now, y'all. Ah, no. Somebody in this group has got to have seen or read a Nicholas Sparks book or movie. You have. Okay, now we're going to rely on you now. Come on. I need your input. When you read that book or you watched that movie, what did you probably do? Did you laugh throughout that whole book or movie, whatever it was? Especially depending on which one it was. Tell us about your experience. Don't leave me hanging. Oh, it was a feel good movie? Okay, never mind. Well, all right. Well, think about this. It's an older movie, but Titanic, have y'all seen the movie Titanic? Come on, people. Don't let me down. Yes? Yes. Okay. Now, did you laugh throughout that whole movie? No. What did you probably do at the end of that movie? You probably what? Oh, yep, there you did. You cried. You cried. And if you were like me, you had a little bit of anger because I'm in that group. Like, I strongly believe that she could have scooted over and there was room on that door for poor Jack. You know, there was room on that door. But you cried. But did you sit through and watch that movie even though you were ugly crying? Because let's get real, you probably were ugly crying because I was ugly crying. I had no business. My parents should never have let me watch that as little as I was. Like, what were they thinking? But we were crying. But yet we still sat through it. And then when the 20th anniversary came out, we went back and we watched it again. And we knew better and we took our tissues, but we still cried, did we not? But we watched it because it was still entertainment. That's the point I'm trying to drive home with this. So that way, I really like drag this out because so many times students will miss questions about entertainment because they think it always has to be something funny or has to be something positive. We go watch the movies and they are scary horror movies. We watch the serial killer movies like what is it? Michael Myers, like that dude never dies and he is going to plagiarize our night. He's going to fill our nightmares until the end of time. But we still go watch it, right? Right. So, Entertain. Just remember, if something's to entertain, it's not necessarily always positive. I always tell students to think, is it evoking any sort of emotion from you? Whether it be funny, whether it be positive, whether it be negative, whether it be ugly crying, it's pulling some kind of emotion out of us. Okay? So, and just remember, poor Jack. She said she never let go, but she did. Okay, I digress. My bitterness, it is seeping through. So to describe, there's also the purpose of to describe. We write things because we want to describe things to our audience. We are going to use sensory details to create a very vivid mental picture for the person we're writing to whomever our audience is. So this is where we're using those sensory details. Remember, sight, taste, touch, sound, etc. So you're using that to describe people, places, things, events. Okay. And then last, we have to explain. So when you're using it for the purpose of explaining, this is when you're telling someone how to do something and you're using text features. So that might be bullet points, numbering. Think about the back of a cake box. They're going to break it down into different bullet points. Well, I mean, they don't really put bullet points on the back of a cake box, but you get what I'm saying, right? So that's when you're breaking it down. That's going to be more that procedural writing. They're telling you how to do something. Okay, so lots of different ways and different types of purpose. A couple tips for determining purpose. Where is the text appearing? If it's on the back of a cake box, it's probably giving you directions, right? You know, if it's in a novel, it's probably going to be entertainment. Then ask yourself, what's the text structure? Most likely, if it's bullet points and numbering, it's going to be procedural. It's going to be that last one to explain. If it's a haiku, it's probably going to be entertain. Then keep in mind, what's the author's tone? If it's entertaining, it's probably going to, have some positive or it's going to have some scary things. If it's tone, if it's very factual to the point, it's probably going to be informed. And then ask yourself, who is this text for? Is it for a classroom full of students who need to know how to submit a document into their LMS? Or is it for a nurse who needs to administer medication? So who's the audience? And then what response is that author looking for from the audience? If it's informed, they're just looking for you to gain knowledge. If it's persuading, the response is that you're going to agree with them. If it's to entertain, it's going to evoke whatever emotion it is that the author's trying to evoke from you. And then if it's describing, it's so that you have that clear mental picture of whatever it is that's being described. Now, going back to fact versus opinion, use those to help you. I've already told you this, but I'm going to tell you again, okay? If you see a lot of facts, you're probably looking at something to inform. If you see a lot of opinions, you're probably looking at something to persuade. So keep those things in mind because those can kind of help you either determine or narrow down what type of purpose the author has for this passage. Now, with author's tone, I just touched on that a little bit, but to kind of go into it a little bit more, just a little bit. So, like purpose, there are different types of author's tone. There is informative, and if you have something that is written in informative, it's going to have a neutral tone because remember, it's just presenting the facts. They're not getting worked up over anything. If it's persuasive, it's going to have that emotional wording. It's going to call attention to one side or another of the argument. If it's entertain, the purpose is to evoke that emotion from you. So in order to do so, it's going to use that emotional tone, whatever type of emotion that may be. If it's descriptive, that's going to also have that neutral tone to it because it's using those sensory details to just paint the picture. They're not trying to really pull anything out of you. They're trying to give something to you. And same thing with expository. So the purpose is to explain. It's neutral. It's giving you facts. It's stating what you need to do. Okay. So keep all those things in mind when you're trying to find purpose and tone. So if you get those questions about purpose or tone, these are things you want to keep in mind. Now, how do we identify evidence that's needed or should be used to support the author's purpose? So this is where you have to combine all the skills we've talked about so far in order to identify the evidence that supports the author's purpose. Author's tone and opinions, those are revealing evidence that can help determine the purpose. So the tone and the opinions can help you to figure out what the purpose is. So you can kind of work backwards in that sense. And then facts that the authors use, those are going to affect the idea that the author's using to build with their passage. All right, so this section's like pretty short, sweet, simple. So let's do a little bit of practice for this. So tone, this is all about tone, because this is one that people tend to struggle on. So take about 2.5 minutes and answer these questions, and then we'll come back and check. Okay, ready, set, go. All right. Oh, I see some people still answering. Go ahead and finish up. All right, let's take a look. Oh, so number one, number one is B, mysterious. The abandoned house stood at the end of the street, its broken windows staring into the darkness. How creepy. Number two, that one would be C, optimistic. So despite the storm. Number 3, B, frustrated. That's what it's like living with teenagers, I bet. Number 4, what tone is conveyed? So this one would be B, informative. Any questions on those? 3, that one was B. Okay, let's go back and look. So for number 2, you put B, nostalgic. Despite the storm raging. I can see where that one would be. Oh, you're fine. So for number 2, nostalgic and melancholy could also, I think A and B, both of those could make it appear, or based off what they're saying in the sentence, it could appear melancholy because, melancholy is expressing that little bit of sadness. So they sat together, but it's grateful for the warmth of their home. So that one would kind of eliminate melancholy because it's not really sad, but the nostalgic, I could see where you would think that one because they're sharing the stories, they're laughing together, but this is where we have to think about what's the best option. And the key words would be despite the storm raging outside. Because it is so specific to point that out, because it starts with that introductory phrase, despite the storm raging outside, that is what pushes it to be the optimistic. So it's making a point to show you that there's something negative, but even though there's something negative going on, they're still pulling together and laughing and sharing stories. So that's where, instead, if it had just said the family sat together by the fire sharing stories and laughter, grateful for the warmth of their home, that would have definitely been B, nostalgic, hands down. But because of that one little phrase, despite the storm raging outside, that's what shifts it from just being solely nostalgic to being the optimistic, because they make a point, the sentence makes a point to show a negative, but then highlighting the positive. You see what I mean? That's how tricky that wording can be sometimes. That's a great question, though. Any other questions? Let me go back, make sure I didn't miss any. Everybody good? Let me wait and see just before I move on. All right, then. Okay, so like I said, we'll come back and practice a little bit more with that in a minute. Well, in a few minutes, but section 4, the last section for tonight. This is where you're analyzing a given text, so a text that they give you, for the author's point of view and perspective. Now, we've talked a little bit about point of view, so we're going to look a little bit further into it. So this is where you do need to be able to read a passage, identify what the point of view is, and this one goes a little bit more in depth at looking at the credibility of the text's source material. So what are they basing their information off of? And then analyzing applicableness and accurateness of that material. So again, we talked about this briefly, but let's just review point of view. So first person, this is where you're using those first person pronouns. The narrator is in the writing. I remember growing up on the lakes of Indiana. Second person speaks directly to the reader. It's going to use those direct second person pronouns. So this is that command expository writing. Implied second person, this is where, again, it's still speaking directly to the reader. It's just without using those second person you pronouns. It's just the implied second person. And then third person, this is where your narrator is outside of the story. The author is not in the story. It's not connected to the events, the information, or the information that's being given. The author's going to use third person pronouns for this type of point of view. So now, why do you need to be able to identify? Well, this is going to help you for a couple of different reasons. If it's first person point of view, this is going to be used when the author's thoughts or feelings are important. So this is where the author is trying to really highlight what the thoughts and feelings are for that writing. If it's second person, the author wants to address you, the reader, directly. That's because it's most likely intended for instructions. So again, being able to determine point of view can also help you determine purpose. Third person is when the author wants to give objective information because that author is removed from the story, and it's going to insert in, and they're not going to insert in their own bias. So it's going to have that neutral tone to it. Now, author's perspective, students will often get purpose and perspective mixed up, but perspective pertains to what the author's or the narrator's thoughts, feelings, perceptions on information or events is. So this, unlike purpose is why it's being written, but perspective, that can affect, that can be affected by personality, bias that the author has, different interpretations that the authors make. This is where you really have to pay attention to word choice and determine if there's any positive connotations or negative connotations attached to those words. This is where you want to look at the information that's being given, but you also have to think about it as what is not being given. Okay? So you have to think, okay, well, this is what I got, but what am I missing? Now, for this section, you are going to see some questions where you have to evaluate the type of source or sources that the author might use for different reasons. So, again, let's talk about some terminology. What is a source? Well, that would be a person. A source can be a person. It can be a document, can be a whole publication, information, and that information can provide data and knowledge on a certain subject. Okay? But a source is going to illustrate where the information came from. Now, what are sources? What are different types of sources? Where do they come from? So those can be books, articles, websites, research papers, interviews, surveys, databases, personal accounts. We have so many different types of sources. And then someone actually asked me earlier when we were talking about like journals and Anne Frank's diary and stuff, was that considered a primary source? Well, that was a great question to ask at that time, and let's circle back to it. So when you are dealing with sources, there are sources that we call primary sources, where you're talking about the original document, okay, whether it be a first-hand account, a diary, or it be a recording of something. So that's primary when you're talking about the actual original document that's being used. But if you talk about secondary source, that's where it's a summary of whatever that original was, or an interpretation of whatever that original was. This is some sort of analysis on an original source. Okay, so it's not an original thought, it's an analysis, it's a reflection of a primary source. But why do you need to be able to evaluate sources? Well, this is important because we want to look at reliability, credibility, and relevance. These three things must be assessed in order to determine and ensure that there is accuracy and integration. I can't get the word out tonight, y'all. It's like it's stuck. The integrity of the source is essentially what I'm saying. We want to make sure it's reliable. And that leads us into reliable versus unreliable sources. Now, these are all things that they're not going to ask you directly, like, oh, is this a reliable source? They're not going to be that easy on you. This is background information you need to know to be able to answer other types of questions. So, reliable sources, those are going to be trustworthy. They're going to be credible. They are going to provide you with information that is accurate. It is going to be researched. And there's an authoritative content. So somebody that is an expert on this will have a voice. Now, they are considered reliable because they are based on their reputation, editorial standards, fact checking, and verification. So somebody has done their homework and they have checked behind themselves. This is going to be reliable sources are important because they're recognized for their expertise, their objectivity, so they're basing themselves off the facts, and commitment to being reliable and, most importantly, unbiased information. Now, if it's an unreliable source, this is where the information is not coming from a trustworthy place. It's not credible. Nobody did fact check on it. Okay. You're not sure if there's actually accuracy or any validity to what that source is saying. It could be misleading. Most importantly, it could be biased. So, and remember that can be in favor or against something. Could be based off false information. There might not be proper verification of the material that source used. So, unreliable really opens up a whole can of worms. Now, how do we evaluate sources? Well, in the English field, and you don't have to do like this whole breakdown for the test, but this is kind of like the quick rundown of what you really kind of have to do in your head. Well, keep in mind the CRAP test. I know it's a terrible name, but it's a terrible analogy for it, or acronym, sorry, acronym for it, but it's helpful. So what you want to do is you want to ask yourself, what's the currency? Is this information up to date? Now I'm not going to read all this to you. Okay. I'm giving you the gist of it. This is so that when you go back later and you're reading this by yourself, you'll understand what we were talking about. So this is reflection material, but is it up to date? So is it current? Is it relevant? So does it actually pertain to whatever it is you're supposed to be finding information for? Is there an authority? Now that means that is somebody, whoever wrote it, do they have the background, the training, the education to be able to speak on this? Because, if someone has a PhD, so they're a doctor in education development of curriculum, well, they have the correct credentials to be able to sit there and tell you that this is how you should properly structure your courses. But if they have a PhD in chicken anatomy, they probably are not qualified to talk about curriculum structure, are they? No. Okay, so accuracy is another one. This is where you need to be able to think about, is the source reliable? Is it truthful? Is it providing correct information? And then last, what's the purpose? Why is this source, or why was this source written? Okay. Now, how does that all tie into the questions that you're going to see coming from this section? Well, that's what we're going to take a look at here. You'll see that in these questions, it's not asking you to regurgitate the vocabulary, the definitions of what we just talked about. You actually have to apply it here. So you have to think about credible sources and how they apply to certain topics. Okay. Now, this section is a little tricky, so I'm going to put 3 minutes on the timer, and then we're going to come back and check. Let's see how you do with this type of question. Okay? Ready? Steady. Go. All right, let's take a look at these. So for number 1B, peer review article published in a scientific journal. 2C, the author's expertise. 3B, and 4 would be C, a speech given by Abraham Lincoln. So remember, a biography is not a first-hand account. That is someone else writing about Abraham Lincoln. An autobiography would have been a primary source because that was written by Abraham Lincoln. So that's the difference there. If you got that one wrong, I'm not sure. Any questions about any of those? Am I doing okay? All right. So that's actually all of the overview for tonight. But if you guys are up for it, we still do have about 20 more minutes. I do have a practice worksheet with some practice test questions. Everybody up for that? Yes? Okay. All right. So give me just 1 second, and I'm actually going to send you the file. But this is what it's going to look like. Okay, so give me just 1 quick second. So sorry. Forgot to have that set up. Oh, there it is. Okay. Check the chat if you're on Zoom, and if you are on Facebook or YouTube, check the comment section, and you should get a PDF that opens up to this file. And let me know if you don't see it. Everybody got it? Should look just like this. Okay. All right. So for the first section, we're going to take it section by section just to make sure that no one gets overwhelmed. But the first section has 4 questions based off that passage. I want you to read through this and give me your answers. Okay. So since there's 4 questions, I'm going to put 4 minutes on the timer. We'll come back and check. Okay. That way you got time to read it and answer each question. All right. Ready? Everybody good? Set. And go. All right, take a few more seconds to finish up. All right, so for number one, it was A and C. Select all that apply. Number two is D as in dog. 3 is A. And 4 is B as in boy. And what I'll do is I will also give you the answer key, so you'll have these detailed explanations. So for number 3, this is one that gets students. So neutral viewpoint versus positive viewpoint. So just because they're arguing, like if we go back up here, just because it's talking about those who argue in favor doesn't mean that it's necessarily showing a positive viewpoint. If you notice, there were no value words, there were no strong bias words. This one, yes, while it's presenting a side, like as it's showing you like those in favor of arts, say it should be mandatory because of the benefits first, but research shows they're not playing on that emotional draw. They're presenting facts and figures, so it's very informative. So that's where with number 3, it gets to be a little bit tricky. Where'd I go? Because it's third person and it's presenting that neutral viewpoint instead of a solely positive. It's not like it's overwhelmingly positive. It's very neutral. It's just presenting those facts. Does that make sense? You're welcome. But yes, be careful of that. Just because something does argue in favor of it doesn't mean it's always a positive. Okay. Yeah, let's go back. All right, so number 1. Which of the following are facts that are supported in the author's claim? So this one would be A, arts education has been proven to enhance critical thinking skills, and C, participation in arts programs has been linked to improve academic performance. So if with A and C in the passage, it specifically backs up about the cognitive, let me see. So the exposure, cognitive skills, there's that one. And then academic performance. That one's right there. But it doesn't necessarily say that it's only beneficial for those who are pursuing career in the arts. Okay? So it's not arguing that it's only for those who are going to become artists themselves. It's talking about the role that arts education plays for students in general. And with D, arts education has no impact. Well, that goes against exactly what it was saying right here. So A and C, those were supported by those supporting details. B, that one's too narrow-minded. That's not actually, there's no way to support that with the passage because it doesn't come around and say it's only for people who are going to be singers or painters or whatever. But with number 2, the stereotype, this one is a very tricky question and this one's hard. But this one is so students' exposure to arts education gain cultural consciousness and responsiveness. So this one can be stereotypical or show a stereotype because yeah, it is positive, but it's just assuming that all students who participate automatically gain that cultural awareness. Okay? And it's making that general assumption. And then number 3 we talked about. Number 4, which of the following describes the tone? So this one would be B. The passage maintains that persuasive tone, advocating for the mandatory inclusion of arts by presenting, this is what I was talking about with number 3, it presents the evidence and the arguments. So it's not descriptive because it's not using those sensory details. It's not, I mean, it is argumentative, but remember, there's a big difference between argumentative and persuasive. Persuasive is trying to pull you to one side. Argumentative is going to present both sides. Persuasive is trying to pull you to one side. Argumentative is presenting both sides. So that's a big difference in that wording right there. And then informative, yes, it does present a lot of facts, but it has that resounding persuasive voice or tone to it because it's saying it should be mandatory. And so by using that signal word, it pushes it into that persuasive, not argumentative, because it does not present both sides of the argument equally. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Does that help with all those for y'all? All right, so if everybody's okay, let's go on so we don't run out of time. Let's go on to section 2. So you wanted some practice with figurative language. Well, guess what? You got it. So there are 4. I tried to do 4 for each section. So there's 4 right here. Okay. Go through, and I'm only going to put 2 minutes. 2 minutes on the timer for this one. Let's see how we do, okay? All right, ready? Set. Go. All right, let's take a look at these. So number 1 was D, personification. 2 is B, simile. 3 is B, full of energy and brightness. And number 4 was A, simile. Number one, let me go back up. All right, number one, the difference between C and D. Okay, so remember simile, that's where you're showing a comparison. Okay, the wind whipped through the trees with an unforgiving force, and ultimately it tore across the land relentlessly. We're not actually describing, we're not making a comparison to the wind to something else. We're giving that wind that personification. It's whipping, it has that unforgiving force, it it tore across the land. So that's all things that a human could do. And those are all personification. Simile would be making that comparison and most importantly using those words like or as. You're welcome. Let's see, number 4. Read the sentence below. His record is as clean as a whistle. So that one would be a simile because we're comparing the record to being clean like a whistle. And we use those words as. So that would be the comparison. So we see there's a comparison. So that means it's either simile or metaphor because both of those do a comparison. But similes are the ones that use the word like or as. Oh, you're welcome. All right. Any other questions? Those are great questions. All right. Let's go on if you're up to it for section 2-3. Oh, wait, I'm on the answer key. Wait, where'd my... Oh, no, I have it labeled. It says answer key, but it's actually not. All right, so I got this memo here, and then there are 4 questions to see if you can kind of break that down. Okay? So I'm only going to put 2.5 minutes and just see how y'all do with that. Okay? All right, ready, set, go. All right, let's take a look at 2.3. So you read this lovely memo. Number 1 is B, to inform faculty. Number 2 is D, to explain the standards for accessibility. 3 is C, professionalism. And 4 is C, all faculty are required to attend. Any questions on any of those? Number 4, oh, and number 1. All right, let's go back up to number 1 first then. All right, so which of the following is the author's primary purpose for writing this announcement? So based off what we read, it is to inform faculty about a professional development training opportunity. We see up here, it's about mandatory professional development. The topic of that professional development, that's where it gets confusing for students sometimes, is that they see topic, but the topic is the topic for the professional development itself is about accessibility and online courses. But the main primary purpose is to tell them they have to do this training. What's that training going to be on? Accessibility and online courses. So that's where it gets a little confusing. Now with number 4, let's take a look down here. Which of the following statements expresses a fact? Well, we rule out A because that's not a statement. It's just the label. Same thing with B, topic, accessibility, and online courses. So A and B are automatically ruled out because those aren't actual statements. A statement would be a complete sentence. So C and D are the only two that I can actually evaluate. So all faculty are required to attend professional development training regarding accessibility and online courses. Well, based off this memo, that is a fact. This person is telling the faculty, you have to go to this training. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Designing online courses makes online learning accessible, usable, and inclusive for all students. While that may present like it is a fact, that's what we call one of those widely known opinion or widely held opinions that presents like a fact. Who says? Because I'm gonna tell you what, I have some students who they might disagree. Designing online courses, like online courses, sometimes that's not always accessible and usable and inclusive for all students. So that's something that could vary from person to person based off their beliefs. All right, so any other questions? All right, so as we wrap up, let's get to the last section. That is 2.4. So this one, you've got a little bit of a passage to read, and you've got 4, nope, hold on, I lied, 5 questions because I did 2 different ones. But let's see if you can find those there. Since there's 5 questions, I'm going to put 4 minutes on the timer, and then we'll come back and check those as well. Okay, all right, ready, steady, go. All right, let's take a look at the last section up here. So for 2.4, number 1 was C. Oops, I skipped it. Number 2 is D. 3 is C. 4 is D. And 5 is C. Looks like everybody did pretty well with those. How are we feeling about them? Wonderful. Question 2. Let's go back. Number 2, where was it? Which of the following features would support reliability of a source? So this one, we got to really kind of dive into what kind of source it's talking about. A link to a site where an author's books can be purchased. Well, that's just selling something. It's not actually going to have a lot of evidentiary support behind it. Customer reviews. Well, be careful because those are very opinionated. They might not have a lot of fact. That's going to obviously change from customer to customer. So that's not going to be truly reliable as well. C, a special promotion. That's the key word for regular customers. If it's promotion, there's going to be a lot of propaganda. They're going to be trying to sell you something. So there might be some misleading information, some biased wording. Again, not a super reliable source. But a link to a newspaper article that gives information and details, that one's going to have more reliability to it because it's been fact checked. It's got credential sources itself. It's going to serve as a more reliable source. So, you're welcome. Any other questions before I switch back over? All right. Well, that is it for tonight. Like I said, I've got this page right here. Somebody was asking about how to get the QBank. There you go. I got you a QR code if you need to go back and rewatch. I've got some other, so if you want to check us out on socials, we got all the socials up here for us. Make sure to check out like the Instagram, especially Facebook. We do giveaways, so might get some free helpful stuff. If you need more information on SurePass or SurePass Pro, I've got you covered. And then if you're interested in tutoring, I got English and reading. We got Shelly on science and Brandon on math. So you can scan QR codes and take you directly to our bookings page. And then last but not least, if you want to complete the feedback survey, you sure can. Now, if you're on Zoom, if you will check your your chat section, there is a copy of the answer key that I was just using. So you can look back over that. If you're on Zoom or Facebook, you've got yours now. And if you want to do that survey, I'm going to grab the slides and the notes. All right. So if you're on Zoom, check your chat for another link. If you're on Zoom, Facebook or YouTube, check your comment section. So in your comment section, you should see the first link was the handout. The second link is the handout answer key. And the third link are all the notes and everything from tonight, all compressed into that one file. Oh, you're so welcome. All right. Well, that's all I've got for tonight, but I'll be back next week. If there's any last questions you guys have, I'll stick around for a few more minutes. But I hope to see you guys back next week. I'll be doing English then, and we'll work on, let's see, part 3. You have a good night too. Have a good night. All right. I see a couple people still hanging around, but I'm gonna go ahead and log us off. You guys have a great week.